Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another office hour that the Office of Federal Emergency Relief Programs is hosting. We may have a new structure, but we do anticipate continuing office hours. We, as a team, has discussed potentially holding them once a month with an integrated newsletter so that both modalities of instruction is provided in the work that we support you folks with. So that's just kind of a quick possible change. Keep an eye on your emails. Our first newsletter is scheduled to go out October 15th, and we will let you know through our GEMS portal about any of those updates. We're just going to get started as we do every week with a quick introduction of our team. We support you in multiple platforms, whether that's programmatic and or fiscal. So my name is Shelley Chassis-Jandro, and I'm the director of the office.
Monique Sullivan, ARP coordinator.
I'm Karen Kuziak, and I coordinate the CARES, which is ESER 1, and Carissa, which is ESER 2. And I'm speaking through a phone. That's how you're hearing my voice today.
I'm Kevin Harrington. I'm the GEAR coordinator slash EANS.
I am Maisha Shah. I am the fiscal coordinator.
Barb Braincourt, the procurement analyst.
Rob Palmer, I do the invoicing for ESER 1 and 2.
And just kind of a word of notification, this webinar is being recorded. So anything that is said and put in the chat box, we will have documentation of. That is only just to be sure that you're aware that the fact that we like to share our slides as well as the recording in case colleagues of ours are unable to participate, they're still able to obtain this information.
So we have a variety of topics for this morning. Some updates about items related to the fund, some information about the Emergency Connectivity Fund program, something new, discussion of meaningful consultation and the 20% reservation, which are certainly part of ARP, Davis-Bacon Act, which actually is necessary to keep in mind for when you're using all of the funds. I'll explain that a little bit later. Monique is going to speak a bit about evidence-based intervention, and she also has some handy advice for troubleshooting and how do you navigate the GEMS system when you're trying to apply for funds. So just background, what we're doing here in our office is every day I take a look at what's going on in CARES ESER and Carissa ESER 2, and also, by the way, CRF, just to make sure we're finishing that off, CRF 2 and CRF reallocation. We review them as a team 2 to 3 times a week, but I also take a look particularly at revised applications as they come in to see that whoever is resubmitting the application has done what we've asked. And then I can approve it, and Shelley puts eyes on it, and she will approve the application. So we're trying to move those fairly quick. We also, Monique is working very hard at providing daily review of and feedback for the significant ARP ESER 3 applications that you're submitting. And just for good news and a little bit of relief and celebration in our office, last week our state SEA plan was for the use of ARP ESER 3 was approved by the U.S. Department of Education, and that means we are assured we're getting our full funding, and then you folks are getting your full funding for ARP ESER 3 funds.
So just as a refresher, we do this every time we have an office hour as we're focusing on our ARP currently. Just draw your attention to the law and the intention of ARP. So it is to mitigate and create strategies for mitigation to prevent from the pandemic that we are currently still in. It is also focused on loss of instructional time through evidence-based interventions, through the response to academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs of particularly our underserved student population. We also wanted to draw your attention to an external grant opportunity that you folks might be interested in. So this is not directly connected to our office. There was a priority newsroom release from the Maine Department of Education, but essentially this funding source is exterior of anything that the Maine Department of Education is providing. But it does allow a component of connectivity, and we just wanted to provide you with some information in case that's of interest to you. One of the items there is in regards to receiving Wi-Fi on buses, but I would encourage you to look at the eligibility and additional information and the FAQs, as well as the application process, which again is all external from the Maine Department of Education, but is an opportunity we wanted to draw your attention to.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry. They're doing yard work outside, so I came right around and closed all my windows so you could be able to hear me. So meaningful consultation, we spent a lot of time talking about that, but I have had the opportunity to read quite a few applications. And I just want to make sure that, kind of stress it again for a little bit more, you know, so that there's less feedback when I do review and read the applications. So you want to make sure that you're discussing how the funds will be will directly impact the students, families, and stakeholders in your school district. I have had a couple of districts ask me if they can use it for different things, and I say, well, make sure that it is directly impacting students, families, and stakeholders in your school district. You want to make sure you're seeking input from your stakeholder groups in determining COVID-19 prevention and mitigation strategies and the impact on teaching, learning, and day-to-day experiences. I'll be honest with you, I've also had districts ask me if they already have a plan in place, and if they use public comment time at their board meetings, does that count as meaningful consultation? And that's a question that you need to ask yourself, because if you already have a plan in place and you're going to approve it at a board meeting, when do you have the opportunity for those stakeholder groups to give their input? And then what time do you have, if there is input, how do you put that input into the plan? And so you want to think about that. And so I'm not necessarily going to tell you yes or no on the way you're doing it. What I'm going to ask you is, are you able to implement whatever input you get from your stakeholder groups into your use of ESSER plan, use of ESSER funds, or into the, the application? So that's the kind of questions I'm going to ask back to you. I'm never going to say, no, you can't use, you can't do that format. I'm going to ask you, can you show evidence that you're able to include that input from the stakeholder groups? Also, I've had some, the next piece is use insights from stakeholder groups when creating the plan. I've had quite a few districts ask me what those stakeholder groups are going to look like, or what needs to happen. Your 4 stakeholder groups, you have to have students, parents, families, and you also have to have staff members and people who work in the school. Those are required. The other ones are not necessarily required, but they need to be reflective of what your school community looks like. So I've had some districts reach out and say, do I just need to check migrants even if I don't have migrants in my district? And I'm like, well, let's think about that. How can you have meaningful consultation with a stakeholder group that doesn't exist in your district? So think about that as well. It's not just checking the boxes. It really is having that, figuring out who your stakeholder groups are and providing opportunities for them to put their input in when creating the use of ESSER plan. And then the last one is you really want to try to keep evidence and documentation of that meaningful consultation. We at the department are not asking for any evidence or documentation, but if you get audited or you have any questions about the use of your plans and how you did seek out stakeholder input, you can show the evidence of that and have that for you. I've also had some questions about, well, what if, we want to change our plan based on, we do get stakeholder input. This plan it's dynamic. It's not something that's static. It's not going to stay. If your needs change, then your use of funds plan will change. What I do stress though, is when I do get those questions is make sure that if you do decide to change your use of funds plan, that one, you still have to provide public availability of it. The public needs to be able to access it, which would be on your website. And then you also need to work with your business manager to make sure that if you are changing your plan, you haven't already received reimbursement for an activity that you're no longer going to do or you're going to change. So for example, if you decide you're going to purchase, I'm just trying to think about the top of my head, if you're going to, you funded for a social worker and you've already paid for maybe a couple of months, and then you decide, no, we're not going to do a social worker anymore. This is a really bad example, and you're going to do, you're going to do something else. If you've already paid for that social worker, you just want to make sure that you have enough funds left in your, in that enough funds left to be able to pay whatever you want to do. And because you don't want to have to be, you don't want to overdraw on something or not have enough money in there. So all those things just to think about. I think that's about it.
There are two questions in the chat box, Monique, related to meaningful consultation. The first one is, how do they denote the specific stakeholder groups that they've participated in meaningful consultation with?
Sorry, can you repeat? I'm going back to the chat. I got caught up.
So the first,
yeah, I see that. My question is about how do we note it? You don't have to worry about, the stakeholder groups that are not in your school community. You really want to focus on the ones that are in your school community. So we're not going to, when I read your application, I'm not going to look at it and say, oh, they didn't check off migrant. I'm just going to assume that you didn't have migrants, you didn't have that stakeholder group in your community. So it's more or less, if you do check off one, that you should keep evidence of that. I mean, that's my kind of interpretation of it. Of course, that could change, but it's more of assuming that if you do check off, and also if you did check off, you gave them an opportunity to have meaningful consultation, if that makes sense. So if you check them all off, then it's saying that you had an opportunity for them, all those stakeholder groups, to provide, to have meaningful consultation. So it's kind of like, I think it's more of, we're not going to go looking to make sure that you didn't have that group in there. We want to make sure that if you did check it off, that you keep evidence of it with some format, whatever that looks like.
and the second question is in regards to having meaningful consultation or providing the opportunity. And what I'm putting in the chat box right now is some language from the ARP-IFR, which is the interim final rule. And it states that the LEA must engage in meaningful consultation, and I provided the web link there.
Right, and I was just going to say that it's an opportunity. You don't have to go and knock down people's, knock them down and, chase them around trying to get their meaningful consultation. It's providing the opportunity to have meaningful consultation.
And I think I would add that that opportunity needs to be presented to a wide audience.
And that kind of reminds me, so again, going back to the board meeting, can public comment count as meaningful stakeholder, stakeholder meaningful consultation? And when I've asked districts, I'm like, okay, well, if you've checked off all these stakeholder groups and you're counting the public comment time, are you assured that all of those stakeholder groups had an opportunity to provide input at that public comment? So think about that as well, because my experience is that board meetings aren't heavily attended by people that don't have a specific piece on the agenda. So if you're using the public comment time for your meaningful consultation with your stakeholder groups, you want to make sure that opportunities for their stakeholder groups to attend that public comment time, it's kind of like that piece. It's all about the opportunity. If you have it at a public board meeting and not all those stakeholder groups have an opportunity to provide input or at least hear the plan, then you have to ask yourself that. You got to ask yourself that question. The next slide is the 20% reservation. Again, the 20% reservation is a minimum. And I've had districts who I read their application and I'm like, why didn't you put this in the 20% reservation? Because it's addressing learning loss. And they said, well, we can only do 20%. And I'm like, no, you can always do more than 20%. If you want to do your 100% of your application focused on evidence-based practices that are addressing learning loss, you can do that as well. And this is the bullet B is just something that we're just trying to anticipate, maybe based on what we foresee might happen. SAUs are encouraged to budget more than the 20% to account for any unforeseen circumstances and to keep all projects addressing learning loss under the 20% reservation. For example, a project may require hiring more staff, but because of staffing shortages, positions may go unfilled, and that could create a shortage, and then you could fall into your 20%. So just kind of thinking ahead of that, I know I just had a district reach out to me about a social worker and that they're concerned they're not going to be able to fill that social worker position. I said, well, again, you want to think about your 20% reservation if it's under that. You also want to think about if you're changing projects. We are doing project-based budgeting. So if your original project that was approved has a social worker, and then you submit an invoice for a nurse, it may not go through because it doesn't match the project description. So that's when you would reach out and we could work on revising your application.
So one requirement that goes through or applies to all of the ESSER funds, 1, 2, and 3, and it's explicitly listed in the grant award notification and the application for ESSER 2, is the requirement to conform to the Davis-Bacon renovation and construction requirements. And this includes both when looking at new construction as well as repairs and improvements. And for any project or contract that's over $2,000, districts must meet all of the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirements. And also the contract language for all of both the contractors and the subcontractors must have written right out there the minimum wages to be paid for various kinds of laborers. And my thought is that, the feedback we've received is districts are aware of this, and this is not something new or unusual. But if a district has not been engaged in construction for a few years, they may not know or realize that this is a requirement for any construction or renovation project using federal funds.
And I also want to just add about the Davis-Bacon, and I think part of the reason why I also wanted to stress it was at the $2,000. And so I know a lot of districts are doing a lot of renovation projects, and they may not realize that anything over 2,000 has to be the Davis-Bacon. So, if you're doing like, renovation of something that maybe $3,000, you still have to do the Davis-Bacon renovation construction. And I know there's a lot of new business managers out there, and there's a lot of new superintendents and some new ARP coordinators or ESSER coordinators. So it's just a nice friendly reminder about the Davis-Bacon Act. So the evidence-based interventions, just wanted to go over that a little bit more because I have been seeing some common themes or some findings, if we're going to use the technical term, when I review the applications. So you want to make sure that that you describe the program or the activity or strategy being implemented to address learning loss due to COVID-19. You want to think about implementation of the program versus program cost, and targeted versus everyone And then you want to really make sure that it addresses the impact of lost instruction due to COVID-19. And I have a couple of examples to kind of show what I'm kind of talking about. Let me move to the next, yeah. So here's an example of which one, if I was reading this, which one would be an evidence-based intervention? Hiring a social worker or providing SEL supports or mental health counseling? So if you picked B, yay. So I have a little explanation now at the bottom here. So the cost of providing additional counseling for students most impacted by COVID-19 instructional loss is hiring a social worker. The hiring of a social worker is not the evidence-based intervention. The service provided by the social worker is the evidence-based intervention. So when you do your application, I've had several districts write hire a social worker as their evidence-based intervention. And that's a cost of that, but the actual intervention is providing additional SEL supports, maybe providing mental health counseling. That would be your evidence-based intervention. And then the second example, which one? Purchasing curriculum materials or implementing additional phonics instruction? And again, it is not the cost of doing a program, it's actually what's happening. So go to the explanation there. So one of the costs of providing extra phonics instruction for students most impacted by COVID-19 instructional loss is purchasing phonics curriculum. The purchasing of the phonics curriculum is not the evidence-based intervention. The delivery of the extra phonics program is the evidence-based intervention. So, and again, these are real examples that I've seen in applications where an evidence-based intervention, they say purchasing curriculum materials. And I'm like, well, that's a cost of the intervention, but it's not the actual, because you have to implement what's in the curriculum for it to be an evidence-based intervention. And I can take more questions about that specifically. And then, okay, I think that's it. And then a lot of people are, getting ready to submit, and there's also been a lot of resubmissions. And so I've been working with our GEMS programmer to try to figure out some troubleshooting tips so that you don't have to, I know you're really, really busy, and the back and forth between me and the GEMS programmer, and we're trying to eliminate that back and forth so that you can do some of your own troubleshooting so that you're not relying on me or the GEMS programmer to resolve some of the issues, and you can keep moving with your regular day and don't get stuck. I can't submit this application for various reasons. So the first one, you want to make sure, I know this sounds kind of a little bit simplistic, but you just want to make sure that the superintendent's contact information is correct, that email is correct, because if you submit and the superintendent is not getting the email, then you might want to just double check that it could be a simple typo that's in the application setup. And also to keep, I don't have it on this slide, but also remember that for some of your newer ASER coordinators or superintendents or business managers, whoever is doing the application, and I've gotten several emails, well, the superintendent needs login and information. When you submit the application, you'll send an email signature request, and in that email signature request that's sent to the superintendent's email address, which is listed on the application setup page, that'll have all the login information. It'll have the login and the password. So there's no special login that superintendent needs. It'll all be in the email notification that they get to verify the application. The second troubleshooting tip is submission. So, and it's really tiny on my screen, hopefully it's bigger on yours. You want to make sure that you have check marks next to all of the sections. I've had a couple of districts who They say all the check marks are there. I am sometimes able to ninja into your accounts to see what you're seeing. And I've noticed that not all the check marks are there. So make sure that there's a little black check mark next to all of those. And when that happens, you'll get that blue little paragraph down at the bottom that I've highlighted in yellow. And that will say that you're all ready to go to the submissions page. And then you'll go up to the top and you'll click on the submissions page. And then the third is that you have to download a copy of your ESSER application before we're recommending that you do that. And then you should be able to email your electronic signature to your superintendent. And if for some reason it's still not working, then you can send me an email. And what we're finding though is that, and I didn't put it on here, is that there are some times, which I think I talk about, let me see what the next tip is. Right, so sometimes the reason why you're like, I have all my check marks, I'm going to the submission page, and there's still something funky going on, like what's happening? So we did realize that there's a lot of adding and deleting going on, which is great. That's what we want you guys to really, this is a dynamic document. It's not something that's stuck in stone. But if you go in and you had a project and then you want to delete it because you're not going to do something different, then you want to make sure that you zero out your budget first for that project you want to delete, and then click on delete. Because what we're finding is that there are ghost projects. And so like we go back and to look at the budget grid, and there's a project in there that's kind of sitting there, but there's nothing attached to it. And that could be impacting why you can't resubmit. So just make sure if you do decide to delete a project that you go in there and zero out the budget first, and then click on delete. And then for resubmission also, what I've been recommending for districts is that, if you're changing projects, if you're revising projects, if you're deleting projects, save the project or delete it, and then kind of leave it. And then when you're ready, go back and make sure all of those projects have been submitted. And then you want to hit that submit project. And when you hit the submit project and you go back to the cover page, that's when you should see the check mark. Now, we've also discovered that when an application is reopened, the general directions section or tab and the application setup, which I've highlighted in red here, the arrows, they get reopened. And so again, sometimes when I ask the district, hey, do you see all the check marks? And they're like, yep, it's all done. I log in, I ninja in, and I realize that there's no check mark next to the general directions and the application setup. So you want to make sure that if your application is reopened, just go in. All you need to do is just click on it, go in it, it'll automatically do the check mark, and then application setup again. I think this is just a default that was set up. So you want to make sure that there is a check mark next to those as well. And I think the last tip is, again, when you want to resubmit, make sure all the check marks are there, and then you should be able to re-enter your password and resubmit the application for review. I think that's it. Yep. I'm going to just look at the chat for a few seconds.
So we just have a few questions that our team has been addressing in the chat. One was related to resubmissions. If a superintendent needs to sign or recertify for every resubmission, just kind of to communicate the response verbally to everyone. The superintendent will need to certify the application once on the onset of submission. And then if that application is reopened per the request of the school district and or in the review process of our team and Monique's review process, your superintendent will get notification when that application is reopened. However, they will not be required to return to the application and recertify or resubmit. And then there was also a question in regards to when we were discussing Davis-Bacon and the construction renovation component, and our team having a checklist of items to keep in mind for districts when they're using emergency funds to support a renovation and/or construction project. When will that checklist be available? That checklist will become available in your applications after the Office of Federal Emergency Relief Programs has reviewed the project to determine that it is indeed renovation and/or construction. And as Karen mentioned in the chat box, the additional checklist is to confirm that you are, the district itself is obligating based on the understanding from B6 in the FAQ, and she provided the link there. So really discussing some components that are requirements of CFR, so the Code for Federal Registry, but also our EDGAR components. So we would encourage you, if you have a construction project and or a renovation project that you are seeking approval for in your ARP ESRF application and or any other of the federal emergency relief aid programs, that you review B6 and B7 in particular of that FAQ to be aware of some obligations and some assurances that the districts should be aware of.
And I apologize, I was supposed to remind everybody when the application was due, which is September 29th. I also have had some districts reach out to me and are concerned about the approval. So the way that we are interpreting the act and the IFR is that as long as you submit by September 29th, you've met that requirement, and that from then on, we're just working on revisions and updates to make your application approvable. So I know there's been some districts that are like, oh my gosh, my application hasn't been approved yet. And most of you understand that we had to wait until we had approval for our plan, for our state plan. But now I'm in the process. I started approving applications yesterday if they met all their requirements. I'm really excited about that. Yeah, so if as long as you get it in by the 29th, and then if it's approvable when the first review, then it'll be approvable. If not, it might take a couple of reviews just to work out any clarifications. Some of them might just be the way it was written, and then might take a simple phone call or another email to straighten that out or to clarify that. So yeah, so September 29th.
And there was a priority notice with the information that Monique just shared about the ARP ESRF application due date, which I've included in the chat box for you folks.
And I'm not sure if there's, I think it's time for questions. So if there's any questions you want to put in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, please go ahead. So I just saw a question pop up, and it says, can you please go over the process of posting our plans on the website prior to approval? So the way that we have interpreted that is when you get ready to turn in or submit your application, you would just kind of do a summary of what maybe your priorities are, and then how you're going to use your plan. And it can be as simple as a one-pager summary. I've had some districts just literally take their priorities and then how they're going to spend their funds, and put that on, some of them put it on their front page of their website. Some of them have like a separate link that you can, anything to do with COVID relief funds. Some may have a separate one for ARP. It really depends on the district, and we're not reviewing the use of funds plan. We're just making sure that it is posted publicly. And the question is about prior to approval. The plan needs to have needs to be publicly available, like at the same time as the application is submitted. Now, is it approval versus submission? I mean, I think the assumption is that unless there's some major changes to your use of funds plan that you've posted on your website, most likely the approved plan is going to mirror what you have on your website. Now, if for some reason there's a change that happens between what is posted on your website, the use of funds plan, and what actually gets approved in the application, then you'll just have to go in and adjust your plan that's posted on your website. So again, just like the application, your use of funds plan should be updated based on your application and how you're actually using the funds. So if you posted in July that you were going to spend, you know, some money on some counseling, and then in the end you keep changing that, and that you've morphed and you're doing something else, that plan that's posted should always be the most, I think, current version of what your use of funds plans are. So about the approval piece, your plan, whatever your plan gets approved, that should be the one that is posted on your website. So it's kind of like, you want to post it, then whatever gets approved, you want to make sure that approved plan matches what you currently have posted on your web page. I've also had some districts that actually take and do a PDF version of their GEMS application. You can do that as well. It's a little more, as we all know, GEMS is not the most user-friendly kind of application, but if that's what you want to do as well, I've had some do different snapshots of the GEMS application. I've had some just do summaries. It really depends on what works best for your district.
I just provided a link. Oh, sorry, Monique.
Oh, go ahead, Shelley.
Provided a link in regards to your LEA use of funds plans about a little more information and the publicly available component of it, just so you folks have that information from the ARP IFR.
There's another question that says, can ARP funds be used to support mental health for our staff, or does it have to be focused on just students? So it depends on where you're putting this. If you're putting the mental health under your 20% reservation, you want to make sure, I mean, I can talk to you more specifically about that. So the first answer is yes, you can definitely use ARP funds to fund mental health for your staff. Depending on how the project is going to be written and implemented, it may go under your 20% reservation, or it may go under your remaining funds. So it depends on what your focus of that is. If it's just providing mental health services to your staff, then I would put it under your remaining funds. If it's an embedded cost and something else that you're doing directly for your students, then it may or may not go underneath your 20% reservation. It depends on what's happening for students, if that makes sense. And I can, you can always reach out to me and we can talk about that more in depth about what your idea or plan is. But remember, it always needs to be related back to COVID. So if you do decide to do some kind of mental health, it needs to be related back to COVID.
That's all the questions in the chat box. So we would encourage any of you, if you have some final remaining questions, to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the team while we're all present.
Hi, this is Kathy. I should raise my hand?
You're fine, Kathy. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. We have a few concerns from the superintendent that what we preliminarily apply for as a plan may require revision. And I have assured him, based on earlier conversations with you, that we are able to revise that. And as you just stated, if we had something posted on our website and it changes, then we would need to update what we've posted, but we'd also update our application. And the reason for that is that we haven't had the time to really form and concentrate on the public forums that are needed prior to determining what projects or what initiatives we're going to work on. So, but we do have to apply. My understanding was we do have to apply by the 29th. So we do have to have something out there. And, but he's concerned that whatever we put out there, we may need to commit to, and we haven't had the public forums to really, we're pretty sure what we'd like to concentrate on, but that hasn't been vetted with the public. So I guess I'm looking for an additional assurance that just so that I can state back to him that once we've applied with this, what we're considering a preliminary application, that we can revise it as needed.
So Shelley, I don't know if you want to speak to this as well. I can tell you part of it is that I was going to talk about the public forum part. Now, meaningful consultation doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a public forum. There are districts that are using surveys. There are districts that are posting opportunities for their stakeholder groups to voice their input online. There are some districts are using other avenues, like maybe they're using like a PTA meeting, or they're using or PTO meeting or something like that. They're using some already embedded opportunities, and they're just using that opportunity to talk about the use of funds plan. So I know there's a little bit of stress of like creating a separate meeting or an opportunity to talk about the plan. You just want to make sure, as Shelley mentioned, that if you are using like a survey, or if you're using another venue to try to get input and provide that meaningful consultation, that you just want to make sure that people are aware that that will be happening at that meeting. So, for example, if you use maybe use a PTA or PTO meeting, you just want to make sure that everybody knows, like, hey, we're going to talk about our use of funds plan. If you want to provide some input, you can. So I know it doesn't necessarily, with COVID, having in person may not be the best. So there are other opportunities. You can use surveys. I've seen quite a few districts that posted on their website and say, here's what we're thinking about doing. If you have any input, please let us know. Or they've put out a survey ahead of time and say, what are your needs? What do you think, the fund should be spent on? So it's kind of, I'll be honest, we're kind of like in a chicken and the egg kind of thing. Like, do we have a plan in place and then get input, or do we start from scratch? It is a dynamic process, and we want to work with you as much as we can.
Okay, thank you. I think when I said public forum, we haven't even determined what that will look like. We haven't even determined what the format of requesting input will look like. But whatever it is, we haven't done it, and so but we know we need to apply. So we're hoping that we can revise as needed.
Well, and we need to remember that this is a federal relief package. And yes, it has a due date, which is different than our first federal relief packages that we saw based on statutory language. That due date was a requirement of the department to create on behalf of our school districts. And essentially, if we recall what the initiative of ARP was, it was really to get our kiddos back into in-person learning, right? So the nature might feel a little fast and furious, but that really is sort of the underlying component of ARP, right? Because we wanted to utilize, we as in the US Department of Education, wanted to make these funds available to you folks to be able to engage in that in-person learning, and to do that in a safe way. So just trying to keep that underlying component of what ARP was designed to do, and why these federal funds at an unprecedented amount dollar value are coming to your schools to do, right? So just kind of keep that in mind as well. And that will help you think about what indeed is the urgency of these funds and where can we support that urgency. So I think I missed a couple questions in the chat box. I know there was one that I briefly saw about ARP, homeless children and youth. I believe Megan asked the question. For those of you folks who have been following along, we have also an additional source of funding, which is being referred to as ARP, Children, Homeless and Youth. And Amelia Lyons and myself did an office hour about a month ago, but Deputy Chuda always refers to the fact that if it felt like it was yesterday, it was probably 2 weeks ago, because the lapse of time through this pandemic has been super quick. We do have that office hour on our website. So if you have some questions in regards to ARP, homeless children and youth, you can refer back to that resource. But our hope is also to have some information released to our superintendents in the next week or so. We know we've been trying to process through this information, as well as provide you with a quick application and a streamlined process to utilize those funds to identify students and support them in the best way possible. Some of your school districts may have had to engage in a conversation to create a consortium to be sure that your award amount was over $5,000. And we hope that you're engaging in those conversations if you happen to be a school district and or an entity that would like to engage in a consortium. If you have additional questions in particular about HYC, please don't hesitate to reach out to Amelia and myself, and we will get you the information that we currently have, but we do hope to release a little bit more here in the next week. So Monique, do you want to take the question in regards to, are there specific requirements around items for mental health for staff?
So the first one is just a general cost principle. So all costs have to be reasonable and necessary. So Matt, I'm going to use you. So if you want to send all your teachers to Hawaii for their mental health, that's probably not going to happen, because that's not really reasonable.
Oh, come on.
Even though it may be necessary, Matt, it's really not reasonable. So that's the first thing you want to think about. Is it reasonable, and is it necessary? So if whatever you're trying to do, if it's a mental health piece for your staff, if it's just a way to get your staff to be more engaged, which we know can impact student learning, if it's a way to get staff more focused on, having student come back to, actually have in-person learning. Also, to deal with the trauma that the pandemic has caused in a various of ways. And so you can, put a trauma, a response to that, like a response to the trauma impacted by that. So I would really have to talk to you more specifically about what your ideas are, because I don't want to say something, but it could be the way in which you're framing it and the way in which you're going to present it and implement it. That it would be more, I would prefer to actually have a conversation with you about what your ideas are, because there aren't any mental health can be anywhere from, hiring an additional counselor to, having, professional development. It could be a variety of things depending on what your goal for that mental health is, for that mental health intervention or whatever you're planning. So I haven't seen as much for staff. I've seen more for students, but that doesn't mean it's not unallowable. We'd have to have a conversation about what your premise for doing it is. I'm sorry, Matt, no trips to Hawaii.
So as always, our team is always here to support you folks. I will put up the slide for our email contact information for our entire team. So if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We know everybody is doing the best they can with the information that they have, and we appreciate that. And I always sort of, when I have a conversation with school districts, you folks are the heroes right now in this situation, getting our kiddos back to where they need to be, in-person instruction, and making sure that that concept is happening safely for everyone involved. So we do appreciate your time this morning with us and hope that you found some of this information beneficial. And if you do have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. I will work on getting that slide up in case you need our contact information.